Brian Scotto, filmmaker, carcane addict, the guy who runs this company called Hoonigan Industries. I also direct these films you may have heard of called Gymkhana. I like to refer to myself as a carcane addict because it's become a bit of a problem. I've amassed too much of a collection of cars, and I guess I'm a bit of a workaholic as well. I have no work-life balance. My entire life is cars and making films about cars, and hopefully people enjoy them.
I like the sweater. It's very appropriate that you're talking about.
Oh, I'm wearing the carcane sweater today as we talk. Yeah. Nice.
So what do I call you? Do I call you Brian Scotto? What do you want me to call you?
All right. So yesterday I ran into a good buddy of mine. I've known him for like 15 years, Jason Camisa. You know, I normally refer to him as Camisa. That's the way that I think of him. I think that's the way that a lot of people who watch his show or used to watch his show on YouTube would say it. And he came up to me and he's like, you know, when I saw you the other day, because he came to the toy drive at Hoonigan, he said, I like referred to you as Brian. And then I sat there thinking, is that actually your name? Because I only know you as Scotto. And it's funny, like when you have a last name that works as like a nickname, people forget your first name entirely. Or people start to think that your name is your last name. So like, because my last name is Scotto, I will have people refer to me as Scott or Scotty.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, like I had a landlord for 4 years who just called me Scott. And I'm like, you see my name on the check I write you every month, like, but he just thinks my name is Scott.
Let's talk about the origins of carcane. Where did it come from?
Well, it was actually a friend of mine, Eddie Longshore, and I, when I first moved to California from New York City, I suddenly had space to store cars, right? So like when you live in New York, your habits get controlled by your living space, right? So in New York, I had my Audi Coupe Quattro, and that was the only car I owned, and I kept it in a garage that was like 10 blocks from my house. You know, it was like not convenient at all.
Yeah.
And then I moved, and it was like a half-hour train ride to get to that garage, but that was the only garage that like I had, and that's just how you live in New York. If you're into cars, you keep your stuff where you can keep it, where you can work on it, and it's like a whole other part of your life. Like it doesn't live in your apartment with you. So when I moved to California, all of a sudden, like I had space for 3 cars in my driveway plus 2 in a garage, and my buddy Eddie had all this property that I could keep cars on. So it was like I immediately just started buying cars. And when I say buying cars, I don't mean like I was out there like buying like Ferraris and Lambos. I was buying like everything I could for under $3,000. Like that was like my Craigslist search limit. Was like, ooh, I want this. Like, oh yeah, I think I want a hot rod. I think I want a muscle car, and I just started buying a ton of cars. And Eddie and I joked that like it was like a habit. We kind of dubbed it the carcane habit. And that was like, I guess almost 8 years ago now.
Okay.
And I was always kind of using that like as a hashtag when I was like talking about cars and this and that. And it was actually John Chase who drew the graphic that's on my hoodie right now. We started using it more and more, talking about like it's kind of becoming a bit of a problem. I've got, like 10 or 11 cars at this point, and like none of them run. And we jokingly did an episode on Daily Transmission on our YouTube channel that we called Carcane. I think it was Carcane Rehab or something like that. And it was Carcane Intervention. And it was Vinny and Hurt, who are 2 guys I work with and who are on the show. They actually did like a real deal intervention. They pulled all of our cars out, both mine and Ashley, my wife's cars, and put them all in one place so we could see them all at the same time, because they were hidden in like different sections of the shop. So it was very easy to be like, oh, I don't have that bad of a problem. But they kind of put it all out there on Front Street for everybody and dragged us out and showed us all our cars and like made me explain to camera what all of my plans were. And like you start to realize what kind of problem you have when you've got like a 1929 Chevy Tudor that no one's touched in 50 years, and it's got like a termite problem because it's half built of wood. And you're sitting there saying, yeah, I'm going to get this done and this and this and this. And then you realize like you haven't done anything on your cars in a year because you're so busy. So that kind of was, I think, what jettisoned the word carcane from just being like an Instagram hashtag that I use. Because I used to just hashtag things carcane problems. Like every time I had like another car on the back of a trailer that I was like dragging home from Victorville, it's like carcane problems, haha. But now we sort of released that to, you know, an audience of people. And I think people really kind of caught on because I think that there is something about cars that's extremely addictive. And like you see collectors, but you also see hoarders. And there's like this fine line between the two, right? Right. Jay Leno is a collector because he has money. And then there's guys that like live in Kentucky and have entire farms full of rusted away cars. Those are hoarders. Like there's that line. And unfortunately, I'm closer to being a hoarder than I probably am a collector because I don't really take as good a care as I have as I should of cars. But I did spend a lot of this year trying to get my cars back on the road because it was so much of a thing because it got to the point where I would run into people and the first thing people would say is like, is it Brian's? Does it run? Because that was like one of the jokes that came out of that first episode. And that's like really stuck the whole year. And I've never really felt like that was my reputation was like, oh, you have a bunch of cars that don't run. But it just sort of happened. Like at first, like 2 or 3 years ago, I had a situation where like one day I drove like 7 cars in one day that I had. I was pretty stoked. Like they were all running. And it got down to the point where I literally had no cars of mine that were running. I owned between Ashley and I think we had like 11 or 12 cars and her G35 was working and that was it. And I was like bumming rides from other guys at work to get to the office and people were like, you have 12 cars. Like how are none of them running? And I'm like, I'm just so busy running the company that like I don't have time to work on them. So it sort of forced me to start picking up a little bit of the spare time I had. So that's why if you watch Carcane Rehab, which is the show I do where I try to get all my cars back on the road, it's always filmed at like 2:30 in the morning because that's the only time available to work on cars. But it's also because I like the quietness of working on cars. Like I find that as everyone asks me, like, why don't you just have someone else do it? Like you employ mechanics at the shop. Why don't you just have them fix your cars? But I actually really enjoy working on cars, even though I might not have the time to do it. There's something very kind of therapeutic about it. But it's most therapeutic when it's quiet and there's no one there. You don't have people bothering you. So that's one of the other reasons I like working in the middle of the night.
You're kind of all over the place when you buy cars.
Yep.
So when you're sitting on Craigslist, I don't know what time, maybe it's 2:30 in the morning too. What are you looking for?
Oh man, you're digging into a really dark hole here. So it depends. Sometimes I can be very specific, right? So I'll be searching for years. Living in California, I tend to do a lot of pre-75 searches because there's smog. It's like smog exempt, so it's a little less to worry about. A lot of times I'll do dollar search. So I'll like do anything under this price. And you know, you'll do like, okay, anything under $3,500 or $4,000 or something like that, just to see what's out there in the marketplace. And then a lot of times I'll do just years. So I like, I'll do pre-1945 for like hot rod stuff. Right? And you just search for, I mean, it could take you an hour to go through everything that's on there. And then I like, another big search that I like is kind of it's like 70 to 75 because those are like really shitty cars, right? I mean, that is the fuel crisis comes in 1973. So you have the end of a couple cars. So like you have like, and it's weird, you look at a lot of cars like the Nova, the C10, the Camaro, even like the Ford, like F100 body styles all went from like 67, 68 to like 72. And then 72 ushers in like a ton of horribly crappy cars. Yeah. But they were crappy because they had bad engines and you can just pull those out and put other things in. So I kind of enjoy that weird era of like the fall of American cars, which is like the, you know, just certain cars that lived in that period. I like odd cars. I definitely like cars that other people don't like or haven't thought of liking or things like that. So one car that I've loved my whole life and now sort of have one is a Merkurs XR4 Ti. So the Merkurs XR4 Ti, quick history lesson on it. It's kind of the mid 80s, right? And companies like BMW are exploding in America. Mercedes is doing very well. Audi has started to gain some traction here with the 4000, 5000. And Ford's looking at this and saying, how do we compete with this? Like German cars is what's hot right now. Every Wall Street, you know, guy is driving a 944. Like this has become, you know, what Americans are looking at as being real quality. So Ford takes their British Ford, right, which is almost like a whole different company, right?
Yeah.
Takes one of the British Ford models, the Sierra, rebrands it as a brand called Merkurs, which is and imports it, quote unquote, from Germany. And they're basically trying to create a brand to compete with the German brands that are taking away market share from them. So they bring in the Merkurs XR4 Ti, which is basically a 2-door Sierra, and then they bring in the Scorpio, which is basically a 4-door Sierra. And they put like on a different grill, and they got these big puffy like leather seats, and it's supposed to be like, this is supposed to be the pinnacle of German design, but it's got like a 2.3 liter Puma motor or whatever. That's the same thing you get in a like the Mustang SVO of that era or whatever. Yeah. And it was, it wasn't a bad car, but it wasn't a great car either. Sure. But most of them, for some reason, never got outside of Michigan, like because they brought them in and I think sold them to like Ford execs in Michigan. So you see a ton of them for sale in Michigan, but it's the kind of car that I could do a 49 state search on. Right. So like because it's just not worth searching Hawaii because it's really hard to get things shipped in. But I'll still search Alaska sometimes because I love the idea of like I'm going to drive to Alaska and buy a car and tow it home or drive it home. Like that's a good story. So it's hard to drive a car home from Hawaii. But so looking at that, I'll like search the entire country and only find like one or two for sale. So we were filming the Los Angeles section of Gymkhana. And Ken was driving the Cosworth, right? So Ken had an Escort Kazi, which unfortunately burned to the ground like 2 months ago. Yeah, but that car obviously never was available in the United States. So Ken's coming around, sliding a corner, and actually you won't see this until January because in January we're going to release individual cuts of each of the segments that are a little bit longer. And when you watch that, you'll see this piece, which is Ken just clipping the corner, and it just breaks the steering rack. Problem is, we can't find a steering rack here in the United States, right? So we've broken it. Wasn't a part I think anyone thought that we were going to break. We didn't have a spare, and it's the first shot of the morning. We've already had a miserable time. If you watched episode 4 of the Gymkhana Files, you know that shooting LA was a disaster. This was on the reshoot, so this was actually something that's not in files. We come back, and we break something within, I think it's like 7 a.m. and we're already broken and probably down for the day. So I start talking to Derek, the team boss. I'm like, well, what other rack do you think could fit? Like, what do you think we can get to fit? And they're thinking like we're going to have to just take this one apart and try to figure out what's wrong and repair it. And they've got someone in England who's going and buying a rack and getting on a plane and flying to America with a new steering rack, right? So that we can get back up and running in a day. And Derek's like, well, he's like, mate, do you remember that brand Merkurs? And I was like, yes. And he's like, well, do you think you could find one? And I was like, I might have one saved in my Craigslist search. Hold on. And I had one that was for sale for $1,500. It was red and it was a runner. And we call the guy. I'm like, hey, I want to come buy this right now. And he's like, dude, I'm sorry, I'm at work. I'm like, I need it right now. What's it going to cost? You're asking $1,500. I'll give you $2,000. I'll come get it right now. Like if you can leave work. Sorry, man, can't leave work. I've already missed too many days this month. Like blah, blah, blah. Finally, $5,000. So we paid $5,000 for a $1,500 car just to get the steering rack out of it. The car showed up. The guy pulls in. Obviously, he left work. He pulls in like 2 hours later with the XR4 Ti. And as soon as he pulls in, the technicians just wave him over next to the Cosworth. He's like barely out of the car, and they already have the front of the car lifted up on jacks, and they're already starting to pull the steering rack out because like every minute we're just burning money by not filming. And so anyway, we got that car, and then at the end it was like, all right, what are we doing with this? And I was like, Hoonigan's taking it. We'll take that car. That's fine, no problem. So we had this XR4 Ti. I ordered a steering rack for it, and it sat in a container for a year because we didn't want to explain why we had it until like the whole story of Gymkhana Files came out. We just pulled the car out of the container yesterday, and the thing's awesome. It runs great. Like, so I was going to bring it to Radwood, but we're missing one. There's one like little connector for the steering shaft that we're missing, so we weren't able to get it there. But I'm pretty stoked about that. But those are the kind of cars I like cars that have a cool story.
Yeah.
And sometimes they don't even have to be like cars that were good. Like I like the Cosworth Vega, which is a really horrible car. I mean, it's a post-fuel crisis car that was thought of or conceived before the fuel crisis. So they thought it was going to be awesome, and it was going to be this like 250 horsepower, small bodied, like European style sports car. And instead it was just like this totally sluggish. It has the name Cosworth on it, but I don't think Cosworth even wants to, say they had anything to do with that car. Sure, it's not what you think of when you think of a Cosworth car. But, it's those kind of cars I enjoy. And then also like weird European cars. I just bought a Opel Manta A, which is a car that, not many people are that familiar with, especially here in the US, but, and I'm going to put a rotary engine in it because I love the idea. I'm going to put a 13B in it out of a Mazda, but I love the idea that the Opel Manta A was a German car built by Americans, right? Because by this point, Chevy's owner has an ownership in Opel, and then taking a rotary engine, which is a German engine built by the Japanese, and just kind of combining that, And I was telling someone this the other day, and they're like, "Yeah," and then you just put like a Momo steering wheel in, and you just check all the boxes. I just love how many different countries it would have had to come together to build that car. But the reason I like the Wankel engine in it is because this is like going really weird, and me trying to connect some imaginary dots in the automotive world, is that the Opel GT, which came out at the same time, was kind of like the European version of the Corvette. Mm-hmm. And there at the same time, there was discussion of putting the Wankel motor in the Corvette. Okay. So then that was a motor that the Corvette never got. So I always wanted to build a rotary powered Corvette as like kind of that. And I still might at some point, because I've really started to like the C3 Corvette again. Okay. Because as a child, I just turned 39. Like, that car was really cool. And I know it's not cool to some people now, although I think it's starting to come back to being cool. So, but it was like that car. My grandfather had one. It was just the toughest thing. The door handles are on the top. It's like, it looks fast standing still. It just had all the right things to it. I don't fit in it really well, which kind of sucks, because my buddy Jeremy, who's my assistant director, he bought one, and he drove it to set every day for when we filmed here in Los Angeles, and I was riding along with him one day, and I was like, I could never drive this car. It's way too small. Even with the T-tops out, I don't fit. But so my Craigslist thing is, then I also like searching the word project, which you have a problem if you want someone else's project car. That's real problem level. That's like, that's like using other people's needles at that point. That's that level. But that's like one of my most excited searches. Like, I save that one to the end of like my searching. Like, I'm like, I don't want to go in the beginning. Like, that's a finisher right there. That's like you get into like other people's projects. It's like, that's a really dark hole you're going down. But I also like just searching the word race car, because it's interesting of what comes up. Because there's two things that come up. One is an actual race car. Sure. The other is a Chevy Cavalier with GTO headlight covers on it. That's what you get when you search the word race car. So, and I enjoy that. And I gotta say, like, one of the things for me about like Craigslist searching is I'm not always searching to buy. I kind of love the research that comes along with it, right? Okay. So I'll find a car, and I'll be like, ooh, this is really cool. I don't know much about it. And then I'll spend the next 3 hours, like, just like reading like old message forums, like things that like were launched on like GeoCities, like things that no one have updated it like since like Kurt Cobain's was alive, like that level of like internet depth. And, and I'll go and I'll research different things, and I'll learn a lot. Like, oh, this is cool. Like, I didn't know this about this car, or connecting dots between other cars. You'll find like, oh, during that era, Mitsubishi was making all Dodge, small cars. And so you're actually buying a Mitsubishi Lancer, although it was sold here as a Colt or something like that, And I like all that stuff. So I'll like search and search and search. And then if I fall in love with the story enough about the car and convince myself, then maybe I'll go buy it. But the amount of cars that I star, or like I'll send emails out to people being like, yeah, ask questions. And I wake up in the morning, and it's like waking up like after like a hard night of drinking. You're like, oh, what have I done? oh, I gotta tell this guy I don't want his car. Or you wake up in the morning, you're like, yeah, I want this thing. I definitely really want this thing.
Good,
So
yeah, sleep on it. That's
you gotta sleep on it sometimes. But and I don't really have any regrets in anything I've purchased. I mean, some things I've bought and then sold again. But I like the planning in your head of like, I want to build this car and this is the concept behind it. And I'll go through like the full build of what a car will be before I purchase it. I mean, even like researching what all the parts would cost and who's making this and does this person make that. And I think in a weird way, it's part of sometimes my creative process because it'll help me think about other things that we should do. So like, oh, it'd be cool if we did this, or, oh, no one's really talking about this anymore. What if we brought this kind of concept back, or, and just thinking about that type of stuff. So, I mean, even when one of the reasons why, I want to say one of the reasons why we built an F-150 for the Huna truck was because like at a certain period of time, I got really into like that era Ford trucks. And as you came to my house, you saw one sitting in the driveway, which was my wife's. And I just got really into that truck. So we started talking about different things and I started being like, we should build a truck. And we talked about different trucks. Like we talked about doing like OJ era Bronco. We talked about doing a bunch of different stuff, but that truck just made a lot of sense at that point. And it also was the same truck that Ken's father had when he was young.
Okay.
So it had like a really good connection there. But like I got really into that truck at a certain era and then knew a lot about it. So it was like, oh, yeah, dent sides, bump sides, going through all that. And those are just, it's like, it's one of those things that like kind of helps inspire like other ideas. Cause I like into what you said before, like, I used to not be broad at all on my car taste. I liked Volkswagens. I could argue, like when I was 22, I could argue with you that a Volkswagen Golf was better than a Ferrari. Like I would do it. I would do it because I love the brand that much that it was just full blind like love for Volkswagen and Audis and Porsches, right? And I've felt that way for a long time, but I'll tell you one of the things that changed that was my first real job in the automotive space. I was a magazine guy, but I was working in like culture. So I worked for a magazine called Mass Appeal, which was really a graffiti magazine that turned into a culture magazine. So similar to things like Vice and Complex and stuff like that, but Mass Appeal was kind of like one of the first. So they came around in like 96 and I read it when I was younger. And it was almost one of those magazines that when you were younger, like you couldn't buy it on the newsstand. Like you were buying it off of people because it was like, more like a zine than like actual, like a real press. And I got a job working for them because I liked what they did. I used to write graffiti as a kid. I knew that whole scene. I knew kind of the New York scene. And they had an automotive page on there and I knew cars. So when I was even like still an intern there, they had me starting to write the automotive section because no one else really knew what the hell they were talking about. And that ended up getting me into a situation where I was writing for other magazines like Vibe and Double XL. And I ended up landing a job at Rides magazine, which was like the big shiny wheel hip hop magazine.
I remember
it was
Rides.
like the rapper. Yeah. And I was the editor in chief of Rides for a while. But I didn't care at all about those cars. Yeah. But to me, it was a job in automotive.
Sure.
I got to go write. I got to go do what I wanted to do. And I got to build the magazine. I went from like kind of being like a low-level editor to a senior editor like overnight. And then they quickly bumped me up to EIC in like a year. It was weird because I came out of this culture of like, lowered Volkswagens. And this was before the Volkswagen scene really became like stanced out and like on air. It was more like the pocket rocket era of Volkswagen.
Yeah, so like the GTIs. And
yeah, very much so. Like everything was about like suspension tuning and adding more power and going and like tearing up back roads.
Yeah, like New Speed. I remember New Speed.
Yeah, New Speed was definitely New Speed, Eurosport, New German Performance, 1552, which was originally VW Sport when I was a kid. Like all those brands were kind of, that made that whole scene. Anyway, so we, when I went to go work for Rides, like we got to kind of go explore like this whole other side of car culture. And when I was doing it celebrity based, I didn't really care that much about it. But when we started discovering like the kids in the streets and the cars that they were building, because that's what I shifted the magazine to. Like when I first started working there, it was 100% like really a celebrity magazine.
Sure. And
there was this 2-page feature in the back called From the Streets. And From the Streets was where they would do like car clubs and things like that. And in the end, when I left Rides was called Rides from the Streets, and it was all like guys' cars from the streets. And I like that side of the culture, and we kind of, I won't say we discovered it, but we at least exposed it to the rest of the world. Was that there was a culture called, which mostly everyone now knows as donks, which were like huge wheels on old Chevys. And we went down to go shoot them for the first time. And the thing that we realized about hanging out with these guys was that they were exactly like us. They just liked different cars.
Sure.
And I was in my early 20s, mid 20s when this was all happening. And there I am hanging out with someone who is very different from me in a lot of ways. If you look at the cars they like and the cars I like, you would say they're totally different creatures, right? You're talking like these big, Chevy Caprices on 26, 28-inch wheels, and it says Reese's Pieces on the door.
Exactly.
Right? And then you have my car, which was like super like clean, black, like lowered perfectly on a set of wheels. Everything was like very German, very European. So you take those two worlds and they look like they oppose each other, but you start to talk with the guys who are owning those cars and you realize like we're all the same. Car culture is all the same. Just insert a different make and a different what you want out of it. But we're still kind of building the same cars. And that made me sort of appreciate other cars a lot more. And then when we did 0 to 60 magazine, it really opened me up to like Japanese cars, and because I was very much just the Euro car kid, and I was a Euro car kid when Hondas ruled the world. So like you felt like, I would go to the strip, Franny Lou was the big strip in New York City we used to all like hang out at, and you'd go there and there'd be like 5 Volkswagen guys there. Like everyone was a Honda kid, or a Mustang guy. But the Mustang guys like seemed like so like the generation older than me. It was like
the Fox body guys.
Yeah, like that was just like a later gen than the guys that I grew up with. So take all that, and I get to this point where I start realizing like, man, maybe I like things other than like my own cars, like in more than just Volkswagens and Audis. And I mean, I did exactly as Volkswagen wants you to. I had a Volkswagen and then I got an Audi and then I bought a Porsche. I mean, it was like the perfect, that's exactly what I'm supposed to do.
Yeah, like the progression of German car ownership.
Yeah. And, but I started to really get into STIs. Like I just really liked all-wheel drive cars. So like when I was writing and reviewing cars, I found that I wasn't actually that into the new Volkswagens and Audis. And the cars I was most excited about getting for the weekend or for the week were like the STI or the Evo, and like was really enjoying those cars. And then when the GTR came out, I mean, I was starting to really kind of open myself up to that side. And even on the American car side, like I had completely fallen in love with the Corvette Z06, which was the C6 Z06. Like it was one of the best cars. Still to this day, it's one of the best cars I've ever driven. Like I've driven that back to back with 911s, and I'm a huge Porsche guy. You can look around, you can see there's a bunch of Porsche stuff in my house. Yeah. And I still love the way the Z06 handles on the track. It's just a great, great car. And this started to kind of open up my mind. So when I moved to California, I lived here for like 3 weeks, and I was like, I need a muscle car. And I never had that sensation ever in my life. It wasn't even something I looked at. Like there was this Thursday night get together by on Maurice Avenue in Queens where all the muscle cars would come out. Okay. And I would go with my buddy because he had a Mustang, and I would go there and I wouldn't even look at the cars. Like I was so into just what I liked in German cars that I wouldn't even like walk around and look at them. I would just like hang out and like talk to my friends. Like it wasn't about that, like, and now I can go to any car show and get geeked on anything. Sure. Like, and I think that like it just opened up and it kind of broke the seal of me liking other cars. And now it's like I want to like as much as I possibly can, and it's like yesterday I went to Radwood and ended up spending most of the day looking at, obviously looking at the cars that were there. But then I went into the Peterson and was taking photos of suspension on like 1940s Indy cars because it like was interesting in the way it was done I'd never seen before. I moved to California, and that changes my entire thought process on the type of cars I want. So I buy the Nova, and the Nova was probably like, I bought that car. It was a running car in Arizona, had a big block, and I'd never even seen like a 4-barrel car before other than in magazines. So like I was like a crash course in American cars. And now, and then I ended up rebuilding that whole car, back halving it, like did the whole thing by myself in like 60-fold, myself and a few friends, but didn't have a shop do it. Built the whole car at Hoonigan before Hoonigan was what it is today. And, now it's like I know those cars really well. And I think that was part of it, was like I wanted to learn more about those cars, and the best way to learn about them was to build them myself, And when I was younger, if someone was like, yeah, I got a 454 with a 373, I'm like, I have no clue what you're talking about, dude. Like it didn't even make sense to me.
Right, yeah, sure.
And I didn't like not knowing. And the best way to learn that stuff was to like really explore it. Like you get into it and you buy it and you become part of it. So that for me is a thing. And like right now, I'm like, Rotaries are the new thing. So Hurt is a big rotary guy. And I just love the way, I love how ridiculous they are as engines. Like they're not supposed to work, but they kind of do.
Yeah. The crazy red lines.
Yeah. And the revving on them. Yeah. And just like, I like that. It's just something different. So it's like now I'm getting into that, and it's something I don't know that well, but that's one of the reasons why I want to build it, because it's the best way to learn it is to like really get your hands on it and touch it and do that. So, and then I'm also building a 1929 Model A with a Cadillac flathead engine in it that will be like a rail drag racer. And like the most fun about that has been researching like what a period correct drag car looks like from 1952. I'm really very like research focused. I was listening to this podcast about different types of creativity and how people are creative. And, creativity isn't something that like it just happens. Like you have to do things that like spark it and make it work, right? And in listening to this podcast, I realized, and they were talking about something completely different, but I realized that like my impetus for creativity is research. Like I'll read a book and then walk away with an idea that'll end up maybe making its way into Gymkhana. And the book will have had nothing to do with that, but there'll be something that I glean from there or I connect to that. So with cars, it's the same way. It's like I like to just research the hell out of it, which annoys all my friends because we can't have like a simple conversation about cars. I'm like, oh, well, do you know why they do that? And everyone's like, no, tell us, Scotto, whatever. So, but I enjoy that. I enjoy that knowledge. It's why the internet's the greatest thing in the world, because I used to have to do it with books, and now I can just Google it. It makes life so much easier.
Yeah, it's a much quicker process.
Very.
So is there anything that you gravitate more towards?
My favorite cars, just by like knee-jerk reaction, is 80s, 90s. It's just my favorite, and it's because of when I grew up.
Yeah, makes sense.
So especially like early 90s, I mean, if you look at the cars I own, a lot of them fall into like this small period of time. So you have, my wife and I have a Land Rover Discovery, 95. My Audi Coupe is 90. My 911 is 91. Like that's just I had a truck that was 97. Ashley has a 944, which is 87. Like that's like the span.
That, that sweet spot. Yeah.
That I really like. It's definitely a good sweet spot for me. And it has a lot to do with like when I was growing up, those were the cars that impressed me when I was at sense. That like development age of, 14, and you see things like that. You're like, oh, that's cool. I want one. But as I've gotten older, I definitely have gone down that, like I said, all the way into the 20s. But there's something about like race cars from the 50s that are they're not fast.
Yeah.
But they're way more dangerous.
Way more dangerous.
And way sketchier to drive. Yeah. And the thrill is like way higher. So we just went down to the Baja 1000 and we pre-ran it in a vehicle that we call the Scumbug. And the Scumbug is a late 60s, early 70s bug. I don't even remember what year it is. I want to say it's like a 71 or something. It doesn't really matter. But it's a Baja bug that we bought from Craigslist for $2,200 last year, the day before the Baja. We drove it down to Mexico and we chased the Baja 1000 for the first like 300 miles. And we repaired this thing along the way the whole time. We were just chasing it, which is just like highway road in Mexico, right? Now, granted, highway in Mexico is like a dirt road here, but we were down there and it was so much fun. And like the car is so rickety. So this year we built the car into what would be like a class 5 1600 car. It's a little off from that right now, but it's got proper suspension. I mean, it's got like King Long travel. It has all the stuff on it, but it's still like we took it down there with a Can-Am X3, and the Can-Am X3, which is like out of the box, just stock. I mean, we have different suspension, but it's similar to what was on it, and we put a windshield on it from Baja Kits. But other than that, there was nothing else done to it. It's pretty much stock, and it tears through the whoops. The car is so simple to drive. It's so easy. And then you get into the bug, and the bug at like 40 miles an hour through the whoops feels like you're going to die. Like it's one of the most like invigorating experiences I've ever had.
Yeah.
And then you watch the footage from outside, and it looks so insane because you're clearly not going fast, but you're in the air most of the time, bouncing and rolling over things and completely out of control. And that's something that like kind of came with the Nova for me. Like when I bought the Nova's definitely faster than my 911. The 911 is like 400 horsepower. The Nova is like 700.
Jesus.
But the 911 has precise speed to it, if that makes sense. Like it's fast, but it feels very in control. Where the Nova at over 100 miles an hour, like you just start thinking about like all the things that can go wrong because it's just so raw, and I love that rawness to it, you know. And I've found it hard to find that rawness in cars in the 80s and 90s, so you have to go earlier to get more of that rawness out of it, and just that like that body shake and all that thing that just makes cars, you know,
the twist in the chassis.
Yeah, well, cars are almost too good today.
They are. They're way too good.
They've gotten too good, you know, and especially sports cars. Like it's gotten to the point where the average person and even the average enthusiast can't drive the car to the limit.
No.
You know, and I love the saying, you know, I'd rather drive a slow car fast than a fast car slow. And,
it's more fun that way. Yeah.
I've got an electric smart car, and I've gone to the canyons with it and been up the rear of a GT4, like, and he couldn't get away from me. And it's like, well, that's because I'm not braking into the corners because I'm just momentum driving this thing because it's an EV and I've got instant torque. And even though it's not that fast, like if you know how to drive it, and it's a small car and you can push it to the limit and you're not afraid, you can have more fun with it. My 911 at the limit is, if it goes wrong, you're getting medevaced out of it.
Yeah.
It's not like a simple like go wrong. It's like, no, they're gonna have to bring a crane in to get your car and your body out of here. So it's a different level of how hard you can push something. And it's like I can push the EV to its limit and probably still not break the law, but it's fun, you know. But the tires are still squealing, getting up onto two wheels, like it's fun, you know. And there's a lot of fun as you get cars and they become older. The limit isn't as close, so you can like really kind of push them. And driving a car on the limit that's the fun.
Sure.
So if you have a car you can't drive on the limit, it's not as much fun to me.
Yeah,
so,
that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I've never owned like a Ferrari. Maybe it's a different experience, but like I've driven Ferraris and I've thought to myself, I don't think I could drive this car to the limit. Like I could slide it through a corner, but like I'm still not on the limit of this car. Where like I've driven like plenty of like Volkswagens and like Audis to the limit, and you're like, yeah, this is definitely the limit. I can feel this limit. Like you're just sawing the steering wheel the whole time trying to keep it straight. You're like, this is what the limit feels like. But you know, when you drive like really, especially in modern cars, it's difficult to get to that limit, and they feel a lot more numb today. So
they do.
There's something nice about that era of yesteryear.
On the next episode of the Road Stories podcast,
there's a saying which is every overnight success takes 7 years to make, or something like that, or it takes 7 years to build. And it's almost exactly true for us. So Hoonigan has been operating for pretty much just over 8 years now. Although we say that 2011 was our launch, we were already working on it in the background of like what the brand was going to be, what the future of it was going to be in 2010. I mean, the concept of the brand in its simplest forms was already there in 2009 because I was running my own car magazine, which was 0 to 60, and I absolutely love that magazine. I mean, I hate to say it, but I love that magazine probably more than I love Hoonigan because it was my first shot at doing something on my own.
Part 2 of my interview with Brian Scotto airs January 17th, 2019. The Road Stories podcast is recorded and edited by me, Michael Senderovich. If you like the show, please subscribe and leave a review wherever you listen. It helps the show greatly. Make sure to also follow me on Instagram at Road Stories Mike for updates, teasers, and news. And finally, thanks so much for listening.